Yeah, I'm not going to spend much time. I'm just going to say, introduce Pauline von Hellermann, who's a lecturer, senior lecturer, I believe, at Goldsmiths, currently with a major Leverhulme Research Fellowship, researching the history, particularly pre-colonial history of palm oil. And I'm going to hand right over to Pauline. We've spent enough time.
Thank you. Apologies also for the delay. So I think I will just start straight away, and I will look at you. I think that's better than looking at the screen. So yeah, as I was saying, I'm currently on a research fellowship, which I started at a time when there were I was reading a book on cotton. Maybe some of you have read it, Sven Beckett's Empire of the Cotton, one of those one commodity books, and I happened to notice there wasn't one on palm oil at the time. And so I wrote my application and I got funding to write such a book. However, earlier this year, in 2021, we've had a lot of these books. I don't know, maybe some of you have seen these. First of all, the journalist Jocelyn Zuckerman wrote Planet Palm, which in a way is a very good journalistic, extremely well written, very engaging take. And the historian Jonathan Robbins also wrote Oil Palm, an Economic History. Both of those were really the sort of things I was thinking about writing. So that was has been slightly annoying. And then there was also Case Watkins, a very good book he's a geographer on Brazil, where through the slave trade, quite a lot of oil palm started spreading, and it's sort of become a really integral sort of organic part of the landscape. And then Tanya Marilee has also been working on a big project that also came out. So I've had to readjust a few times. So what I've ended up, I just wanted to give you some context that what I'm working on overall is, oh no, sorry, wrong screen, is a book. So I'm still working on an overall book, but I've kind of gone back to where I was maybe right at the beginning to really still write a one commodity book, but one that is really rooted in and really actually about environmental anthropology, which is what I do. And I'm calling it now Thinking Through Palm Oil, because it's really, and I had the idea even almost from teaching environmental anthropology that you can almost teach every lecture I used to teach through palm oil. So the book does this. So the first part is history, historical ecology, palm oil culture, then the sort of early trade brokers, the sort of real boom, the early 19th century boom, and then slowly moving to sort of the empire colonial takeover and beginning of plantations. Then that's sort of today, the palm oil industry today. Plantation, North Sumatra is the center where, the earliest center where in Indonesia and Malaysia where palm oil started. And that's where I went for fieldwork, and it's a sort of real good way to look at the current political economy, including smallholders of oil palm growing. But then, of course, there's also the big industry, the supply chains, and very important, the whole sort of chemistry. And this has been, everything has been quite a big learning experience for me, but this is, I don't know if there are any chemists here, but it's really quite, palm oil goes through many different transformations, and you have to understand quite a lot of chemistry. I won't probably be able to do it all, but it will deal with the sort of big capital, big supply chains, and that's overall today. And then how we eat palm oil, which is here. One example is Indomie noodles, which are, some of you might eat as well, but palm oil is used in those, at least the ones produced in Nigeria, where Indomie is nowadays, which comes from Indonesia. So Indonesian means noodles in Indonesian, and it's actually a very big, sort of very popular new food in Nigeria now. And then the third section is about protest, the sort of course, what you're probably all most familiar with, the sort of devastating environmental, social impacts and protest around this. Then one chapter called Reform from Within, that's all about the sort of sustainable palm oil, where maybe most of you have questions, or maybe about sort of whether sustainability is the right way forward or not. And then the policy world, and then sort of to finish with a sort of looking at it overall. Today, however, I am just focusing on this one, which is the sort of pre-colonial palm oil culture. But yeah, this is, all of this is now just there, basically, but it would have appeared in interesting ways. But so they are kind of, and of course I'm referring to the Clifford and having a complete Marcus and Clifford book, Writing Culture, the sort of problematizing the whole idea that you can write an ethnography in a sort of holistic way. So how do you write about pre-colonial culture in 2021 when we've kind of gone far more than this writing culture critique? We've had the whole decolonization ongoing process of almost moving away from the idea of ethnography, certainly in Africa altogether, or not, yes, right. But then at the same time also, what I'm particularly interested in at the moment, how to really, and this has sort of become my project over the course of this fellowship in a different sort of more activist kind of mode, how to really make anthropology actually what it should be, which is really to be about and respond to and be a helpful tool in addressing the climate situation we're in. So all these things are going in slightly different directions, but how to write all this in, bring all that in, because, and maybe for you, this is sort of maybe just my internal problems, but how to write something is always, when you're trying to organize it, it's quite difficult. And in this case, it's also about history, you know, when you have a big area, how do you write it sort of something that's not sort of too sort of simplified and not essentializing, but at the same time accessible. And then what we've been talking about, how do you really write a pre-colonial past, because the sources are not really well, there's a real mixture of sources, most of which actually come from today, and so it isn't really a whole, it's an enterprise that you can't really, well, I will come back to that at the end, but it's not like you can really claim to be able to write about the pre-colonial past in an anthropological way. And then also a problem for me, which is that I've kind of really done a lot more political ecology or historical ecology. I've never really done I've never really written an ethnography, actually. I've always kind of gone more to history or politics or ecology. I've never really kind of written about, you know, going somewhere studying Z Mende or something. So I've had slight problems in that respect as well, because this is really about sort of West African culture now. And so that was slightly problematic, but I have tried to address it through reflexivity, transparency, vignettes, the classic, of course, always. Then also provenance, really talking about sources and also not really claiming that it's pre-colonial history. And then also a sort of pluralistic approach, which I kind of really like and have sort of come back to, that which Brian Morris, my colleague, or who I sort of replaced at Goldsmiths, sort of one of the founders of Goldsmiths anthropology and founder or key person in environmental anthropology. And he has this whole thing of that it's, I mean, sort of in a way, if you like, a sort of real critique of this whole ontological turn or sort of cosmological perspectivism, or sort of many cultures, what is it, many natures, one culture sort of approach, which tends to maybe sort of write about one place as if there's only one way of thinking in that place. And his whole point is that actually in any one place there are different ways of thinking, not just by different people living there, but also all of us are constantly thinking about, I don't know, if you think about animals, you can think about animals in a symbolic way, or in a practical, or in a resource, or in a pet kind of way. So we all share different ways of, and have different ways of thinking all the time. So that's sort of my overall approach. Now, to start with now, so palm oil can really be seen as what has been called a sort of a total social fact. And it really is interesting. Well, I find it interesting to study culture, and now I'm using the word which in the sort of widest possible sense, with all the awareness of political economy, history, you know, it's not just one place, one culture kind of thinking, and but also kind of including all the practices, values, but also meaning, significance, all these things. In all these ways, palm oil is a useful way of thinking about culture. So that comes out in two. I'm just starting off with two classic or two well-known ethnographies in one part of West Africa, in both of these, Millicent Leach's rainforest relations and Marianne Ferme underneath of things, which are both with the Mende people in Sierra Leone. And so these both ethnographies are about a lot of other things, but they both write about palm oil, or the oil palm, as really as a sort of the tree is central to a complex web of social, economic, different users, or the tree is at the center of Mende life. And indeed, the Colonial Observer already wrote, the palm tree is to the Mende what the bison is to certain Indian tribes of North America. So it's sort of really central thing. And indeed, of course, palm oil is interesting as it's both the oil palm as a tree, and we learned from Maurice Bloch that trees are good to think with, which they are, but it's also, of course, the substance of palm oil. And there's been a lot of stuff of really thinking lately about materials like or liquids or fluids, or including in particular fat, maybe, which Jane Bennett has been working on, as sort of taking that as a sort of interesting way of thinking about human nature relationships. And Tim Ingold has written about this as well. So with that sort of in mind, it's a sort of way, and this is also what Marianne Fermat's book is about. It's both about the, and in fact, as she points out, the whole distinction between material and spiritual things is really a Western one. Lots of other people in other parts of the world don't necessarily think in that way. And that's really very much where palm oil and thinking about palm oil is situated in West Africa. So this map here was another one where I wanted to start with, and this is really the previous chapter, which is the longer term historical ecology of oil palm in West Africa. It would have just been the map and then careful zooming in of different kinds of, but very briefly, Mende, Sierra Leone is here, Guinea here, Nigeria, Benin Kingdom, where I did most of my research before, here, Cameroon here. This whole area is the current sort of more or less oil palm belt. And earliest evidence of oil palm is indigenous to West Africa. It's from millions of years ago, but then there was a real oil palm boom around 3,000 years ago. Like when you suddenly have in the paleontological record loads and loads of oil palm everywhere. And that was basically initially constructed as because people started cutting down the rainforest and growing oil palm, but in fact it was really the opposite. There was a sort of very catastrophic dry period, and all the forest that was there previously kind of went to real small refugia. And when then there was a recovery, it was first oil palm like the pioneer species, and they started spreading everywhere. And then it was because of the spread of oil palm that then people also started moving into these areas. And in fact, maybe you've heard of sorry, I didn't mean to sound patronizing, I'm sure you have, or the Bantu migration. It's a very well-known phenomenon. It is now interpreted as basically people just following the spread of oil palm. So people are moving into where oil palm are. But then after that, it's also very much a sort of symbiotic relationship in that then people themselves very much foster oil palm through spreading seeds, eating somewhere and then dropping seeds, or by around villages that are then abandoned, and you have big oil palm groves appearing, and also very much in farming, because farming creates conditions where oil palm really thrive. And again, people would foster and protect because they really needed and liked oil palm. So there was a sort of real symbiosis with many different kinds of what Zevon, who is one of the big botanists who worked on oil palm, described as semi-wild groves. So you had with a whole range of different ones, sometimes almost back to forest or new, maybe it wasn't forest before, but then became forest, with oil palm there as a pioneer, or a sort of mixture of farming and mixed forest, or more or less oil palm groves. And then very occasionally you also had areas where people actually planted oil palm in very small, what could be called plantations, in the Dahomey Kingdom and Krobo in what is today Ghana. But this was very rare, and also mostly in response to colonial, to the sort of trade boom of the 19th century. So it was mostly just semi-wild and wild, but always this symbiotic relationship. Now to come to palm oil culture in the terms of how people actually, so that was the sort of, if you like, cultivation. People didn't really cultivate as such, but fostered in semi-wild forests. And harvesting, actually a lot of harvesting, even nowadays, it's quite interesting, quite a large percentage is dropped palm oil fruit on the ground that are picked up. It's always sort of just thought of as not very important, but it's actually 20 to 30% of even in large scale plantations. And that often used to be done by women and children or the families of laborers. And then there were big issues with that. And then, yeah, I won't go into that, but it's quite an interesting phenomenon. But the main way that oil palms are harvested is by young men climbing up on trees. And that, as you can see from these pictures, can be really quite dangerous, and it's very difficult. You really have to learn it. And this is partly these trees are very high because this is when they just naturally grow, and they basically just grow and grow. In plantations, they're nowadays much, much shorter because it makes no economic sense to have tall palm trees. But these ones used to be like this. And here is an extract from, I should say, these pictures are, maybe I just in the interest of time, I won't go into, I took these from someone else's website. Jonathan Robbins, the one who wrote the second book, he has a whole really nice resource online of historical pictures. But this comes as a description of how in the Mende areas, there are these secret societies, or they're big Poro and Sande, and Poro is for men and Sande for women. And they, I will talk about these a little bit more later, but it was in that context of Poro initiation that young men learned how to climb up these very, very tall trees. And I just wanted to add here in terms of source that, so both Ferme and Leach both write about this, but they didn't provide any sort of detail because the whole point is always secret knowledge, or they just said that men learned how to do this. But this detailed description comes from, quite interesting, a sort of modern website on today's Poro and Sande College, which is like a modern version of these secret societies, and everything is just available on there. So that's where I got this detailed description from. So the second, after harvesting, then a second step is palm oil processing. Again, these would have appeared, but I've kind of distributed them basically again, yeah, so I'm not trying to say there was only one method, because of course this evolved over thousands of years, and I'm aware of different historical, different regional traditions of sometimes you dig a hole in the ground, sometimes you use pots, and also, yeah, so basically, but as you can see, there are quite a lot of similarities, and these are the sort of the traditional methods, more or less, that are still done in more or less the way that they have been done for a very long time. And you can see that these ones in Guinea, Cameroon, Nigeria, this is again from Okumo, from the area where I did my photo. They are broadly the same, and it basically involves it's very laborious actually. You have to boil it several times, and then you have to always cream off things at the top, and then boil again, and then filtering, and yeah, so it's not it's very time consuming. But these pictures here, and this work is mostly done by women, but in the 19th century, when there was this massive palm oil boom for industrialization in the UK, in Europe, for soap making and for candles, and then later margarine, and also lubrication for trains, like the sort of saying it, palm oil greased the wheels of the Industrial Revolution, because there was like a lot of demand. So it was a huge amount of palm oil that was brought to Europe produced entirely by local societies. But in that period, as you can see from these pictures, that's an early 18th or early 19th century one, and these from the colonial period. What you can see here is lots of men being involved, because basically then large scale, there was so much more money in palm oil, and they needed more labor. So you had both young men and also slaves working as well. And they had a different method then, where instead of boiling, they would just stamp it. So which created a very crude palm oil, which couldn't be eaten, but was good for industrial purposes. And that you can see here also these pictures from Togo, and this one from southern Nigeria. This is again men being very involved in working. And then this one, as you can see again, it's a sort of everyone in the family is working together, and this is what they're doing here, is cracking palm kernels. Because in fact, there are two different kinds of palm oil. One is from the mesocarp, the outside, and one is from the inside, the kernel, which used to be a sort of hunger oil in West Africa itself, because it's very difficult and doesn't taste as nice, and is a lot of work to produce, but the kernels keep for a long time. So they would often then kind of in the dry period and dry season end up using kernel oil. But later, for industrial purposes, like nowadays in margarine and all these things, it's the kernel oil. Biscuits, it's the inside oil, and that was also produced in large scale, more large scale than before. And again, just to say, nowadays you get a lot of interesting information just through websites that are produced by Nigerians or other West African people themselves here. This is one very nice website on Guinea, which showing all the different steps, a sort of photo essay. And then also you can watch, if you're interested, this one is in Ogun State and in the sort of Yoruba areas of Western Nigeria. A very nice little film clip on how palm oil is made. And there's also another one I saw, a more recent one on Abia State in the in Eastern Nigeria. So there's a lot of this sort of stuff is just available and online nowadays. So food. Now, the most important way that the most important reason why palm oil was produced was always for food. Nowadays, actually, still the majority of oil palm, even in the industry, even globally, all that massive amount of palm oil that is produced, the majority is still for food. It's just for cooking oil, mostly used in India and China and other places. But then biodiesel is also there, but it's industrial purposes, but the percentage is smaller. It's just for eating. And in West Africa, historically as well. And palm oil was always important in this West African forest sort of savanna, ecotone sort of forest savanna context, because it's particularly important for when you don't have much meat in your diet, because it contains the red palm oil, not the processed palm oil, contains a provitamin A. I'm slightly out of my depth here as well, but it's so basically vitamin A normally you just get from meat. But it's a carotene as a substance is provitamin, means that you can eat that and then your body can make vitamin A from it. So it's a very important source of vitamin A, and also vitamin E, which is sort of maybe only sort of more recently known about, because sorry, I have detailed notes on this, which I'm not looking at just now, but there are different kinds of vitamin E, and they actually need different components to vitamin E. And in most supplements, you only get one. You don't get all of it, and palm oil has all of it, and it's very good for vitamin E. So I am actually now a palm oil proponent here in this, but it's the red palm oil. So and of course, but mostly it's a source of fats and of calories, which is very important. And just to cook with, as you know, every cuisine in the world, you need oil to cook with. So for that reason, it's been very important. And I just listed here, these are 3 dishes I know very, very well from my time in Nigeria. First one is simply yam and palm oil together with possibly they've added some fish soup here, but you just palm oil and yam with some salt, which often used to be sort of more potash salt, not the salt from the sea. That is a sort of, if you like, that's sort of the very ancient, because that's always palm oil with yam together. That's a sort of real food complex that's in all that sort of forest area. So it's a sort of really the sort of combination of the two that really fed people well and helped for population increase and for people to survive, basically. And that is also very delicious. I just forgot in all the kafako. Sorry, I did bring, if I can find it now. Yes, my own bottle of red palm oil here. So, we can maybe even open it and smell it a little bit. It has a very distinct smell, but we can do that later. And so that's then here is what is called banga soup, which is really sort of just cooking the fruit, the sort of, or the leftover from making palm oil, the fruits are sent into a soup. And that is very often eaten on farms, like when you often in West Africa, in Nigeria at least, you have sort of little huts on your farm, and sometimes people even sleep there. And banga soup is a sort of classic thing you eat there. And this one is egusi, which is with pumpkin seeds and sort of pounded yam, or sometimes pounded cassava as well, but mostly pounded yam. And it's that's another sort of example of it. I don't know if has anyone eaten. It is, you have, exactly. It's they're Nigerian food is it sort of takes a tiny bit of getting used to. It's not like instantly likable to some, but including my husband, who spent a whole month complaining the whole time. So, but I really love it very much. It's extremely nice food. So these are just some examples here. And of course, food is, if you like, also just such a nice way to think about culture in all sorts of ways. It's all about the different agroecological zones coming together. and the different kind of migrations and different sort of fusions. And so that's all in these dishes as well, the sort of whole history of migration and environmental changes in these dishes. Then it's also about social relations, that whole commensality about who you eat with. And that is also very important in, I should say, I mean, it's important everywhere in the world, but it's sort of a very key aspect in many West African societies. And so, for example, wives then in both Leach and Fermé describe in those Mende ethnographies how women withhold, if they're angry with their husband, they cook him bad food. And in some, someone, I remember also someone saying in Twi, which is a language in Ghana, in current today Ghana, the word for food and sex is the same word. So it's all about social relationships. But the main thing that is really what I really is very strong in Nigeria still today, that people really think of palm oil as the real food. It's and it's sort of and there's a huge amount of knowledge, and people have very detailed knowledge of history and how to cook it and all sorts of things, but also a lot of pride and a real sort of nutrition sort of consciousness about that this is the good food, basically. Now, another way that palm oil, now we are sort of in the pre-colonial period, is used. It was always used in West Africa as well for soap making. This is a brand of soap even produced today called Dudu Osun, which is a Yoruba kind of soap, and it's black because it's made with charcoal, but it's made with palm oil and charcoal together, basically. And that was done, again, the Poro or Sande secret societies kind of taught how to make soap, but it was also made in the Benin Kingdom and lots of parts of West Africa. Initially, I was slightly interested whether maybe all these Europeans who came, whether they learned from, whether they had the idea of using palm oil, of using palm oil as soap from seeing it here. But I think actually it was just, there were other soap making traditions with olive oil and whale and different tannins in Europe already. So it's not, I don't think it was just that, but may have an impact. And one thing though, what I was saying earlier about the processing, that more or less boiling and siphoning off and then boiling again, that is exactly how they're made in mills today. So that process is more or less the same, just on a large scale process. And then this one is a street lamp used in Benin City, where Benin City was a sort of really big, thriving city in the 17th and 18th century. And all the European visitors at the time always described like big palaces, roads, and lots of sort of cultural, political things going on there. And these were lamps they had in the streets with palm oil in them to light the streets. Someone tried this in Liverpool as well, but it didn't really work out. It was so they moved to other lamps eventually. And then it was also used for wall making as a sort of cement, or making cement in the King's Palace in Benin. But of course, it wasn't just palm oil itself. It was also the whole of the palm that was used for broomsticks, for thatching, for rope making, for nets, bedding, and of course palm wine. That's another whole big category. That's all from one tree. So it's basically something where you really, everyone says, and in Benin as well, there are all these sayings that you can use everything of the palm oil palm is used. I've just highlighted here another research method, which is a friend now of mine who I sort of met through Twitter, Wagbale, who lives in Nigeria, and he just wrote this very good comic book about Udo, the place where I did my actual fieldwork, which is, but he does a lot of things, a lot of the lamps and the wall building, that all came from him. So so there are different new ways of developing, of having conversations. And then it's also used very much for medicine and cosmetics and perfume. So this, the narratives of, or the life of Ekwano, that's a sort of really well-known story of someone who was sold as a slave, but then became freedom, and then he kind of described his memories of how in growing up in Igbo, in the Igbo areas of Nigeria. So he described how palm oil was used for making perfume. And it was also very much used as a medicine, as an ointment on wounds or eczema, but also very much as an antidote for poison. Now, I just highlighted here it is still very much used as an antidote for poison. And in fact, I saw now also lots of people saying, eat palm oil, then you won't get COVID. So there's a sort of whole thing there as well. It's an ongoing medical. Okay. But this website here by this, by Ayo Bala Adewale, she's saying actually it can be quite dangerous to eat palm oil, because sometimes then if you give it to babies, sometimes if you give them too much palm oil, that in itself is worse than the poison. So she's sort of trying to do a campaign against it, but it can work basically by making people throw up, because if you eat a lot of it. Yeah, and it's also an ingredient in lots of other medical potions. And yes, and then it's also very much used in these sort of both as a substance in, oh yeah, so it's very much used as a cosmetic as a sort of skin treatment, and that is how it plays a big role in the Sande secret societies, and going back to these ethnographies amongst the Mende, where, and that's sort of what the whole approach of in fact, Flame's book, if maybe some of you have read it as well, but it's all about taking these materials as the focal point, clay and palm oil is one of them, and various others, and then to look at sort of culture and history and memories through these substances. And so what she describes is how people talk about clay and palm oil. Clay is used in the early stages of these initiation rite, which is basically like a sort of face mask, the way that clay is used nowadays as well, to make the skin smooth. And then when the initiation is over, when the girls sort of come out, then they are they use palm oil, and that's sort of then the next stage when they're mature. So it kind of plays a big role in that sense of the sort of transformation. Clay about usefulness and sort of preparation, and then palm oil when you're ready to get married. But at the same time, both the Poro and Sande initiations are also very much about sort of knowledge passing on. And some of the key things, as I mentioned before, the Poro, the societies taught boys how to climb oil palms, but also palm oil processing, soap making. All these things were taught in these sort of as sort of secret knowledge. And I just wanted to. This is also, in fact, that's really the main theme of Flame's book. It's called The Underneath of Things, because it's always about this linking between the visible and the invisible, and where of course masks play a big role in all throughout West Africa, but it's always about this sort of concealment and the things you can't see, but being there in the things you can see. And she links all this very well to history and memory, basically the sort of traumatic memories of the slave trade, and how people are just very used to always hiding and having to sort of maybe speak it or communicate in a more coded way. So that's what this book is all about. And palm oil is one of the substances with which to sort of think through this. And in fact, it's also used on the masks themselves. These are some of these Mende masks, which are sort of meant to be like these beautiful women when they come out, and sort of virtuous and good, and they that they actually use palm oil as to moisten the mask themselves and to make them shiny. That again, palm oil plays a role in that. So it's a sort of both. It's sort of at the heart of all these rituals. And then here, my favorite slide, which it's also very, very central in other. So this is, I'm now moving from the Mende areas to Nigeria and the Yoruba and Edo areas. Edo is Benin Kingdom, and the sort of, if you like, Orisha shrines, or the sort of deities or pantheon. In fact, pantheon is quite an appropriate word in this case. Of course, we have to be careful with using Eurocentric words, but they are really, really striking. I mean, the more you read about it, the more striking it is how similar a lot of these gods and goddesses are to the Greek pantheon. Like really very, very similar stories. It's really like, I would like to just sort of it is of course, but it's quite interesting. And they so the two. So there's Olokun, Osun, there are lots of different ones, but I just wanted to highlight two, Sango and Ogun, who both of whom are sort of rooted in long ago sort of mythical kings of Ife, or sort of Yoruba kings. but who now become gods and who are then prayed to at shrines. And so on the left we have Sangor, who is the god of thunder and fire and light, who always has a double-headed axe, and he yes, and of fire. So that's sort of and on the left is Ogun, who is the god of iron, who is sort of prayed to by. So the people of both people can pray to different shrines when they feel like it, but sometimes you have your main one, and you're sort of a Sango follower or a Ogun follower, but it's not totally set in stone. But the Sango followers are said to be kind of particularly fast and quick-witted and intelligent and very masculine, and like sort of, you can see from the picture here. And Ogun is followed by very often by farmers or warriors and hunters, and also nowadays very much car mechanics or drivers. And that's really how, and it's because it's about iron, basically about metal forging. It's all about that sort of local, that sort of history as well. And in both of these shrines, palm oil plays a really big, or the whole oil palm plays a big role. So if I start with Sangor, Sangor has, first of all, so all these different deities have, if you like, different things you offer them or different associations. And one of the foods that you offer to Sangor is amala, a food also cooked with shrimps and palm oil. And that's sort of a flame, but you also use, he's also said to, or you makes this a sort of, or is himself supposed to have used a torch made from the inside of an oil palm, and then lit with, soaked with palm oil, and that is how he then created fire and starts lightning. So that's sort of centrally there. And this is, and his colors are, it's also, by the way, one of the key reasons why palm oil is so important is just because it's very red. So that red is a very important color for both of these gods. And so here is the palm oil. This is a Sangor shrine in a sort of more, yeah, but there are many different kinds of shrines and lots of very new artistic ones that are quite different to how sort of rural small ones in cities. Maybe this one is sort of, and Ogun, so Ogun is the god of for mechanics, and who very often you have to pray to him before you go on a journey so you don't have an accident, or that mechanics, sometimes they do a sort of sacrifices or something, and you always put palm, you can see it here, you put palm oil on top of it, and because you're supposed to, like with pouring palm oil and putting palm fronds together with two pieces of metal, that is then supposed to release the powers of Ogun, or to make them work. And it's, so palm oil is really central for both palm frond is sort of symbolic for Ogun, but also palm oil is associated with this. And I added again Twitter, just, yeah, I spent too much time, but it's yeah, well, because actually it's quite interesting. You can probably not read this, but I just typed in Sangor palm oil or Ogun palm oil, and basically it is really nice. You can just see that everyone is completely familiar with, and this is a very normal cultural references. So here, someone's baby spilled a lot of palm oil on their sofa, and someone else is saying, "Oh, Sangor better not know about this," or something. And then this is all like, I mean, you can't really see it, and I can't even read it from here. But it's basically very normal things where people just refer to palm oil and Ogun or palm oil and Sangor all the time, and all these references are completely. And I remember even when I was there, I was always struck by the sort of level of complete normal knowledge, like the way that we wouldn't now necessarily if we saw a statue of Hercules or Poseidon or something, but everyone would, yeah, just completely recognize all of these. But to continue with Ogun, that is also Ogun is also very much about sort of controlling. Yeah, so you can, for example, in Benin City, the Oba has like bans on, sometimes you're not supposed to carry palm fruit around, or because of danger of avoiding disasters, or not palm fruit into the Oba's palace, so that there are no traffic accidents. And this is also done by mechanics. And this time, this comes from a Reuters website, but it was about preventing inspections by road police. So that's what this particular sacrifice was about. But then here is a very a poem by Wole Soyinka, the very famous Nigerian writer, called Dawn, which is all about Ogun as well as a religion or as a god, but it's also very much about actually all about the oil palm. He uses the oil palm as a sort of symbolism for thinking about Ogun. So here you see the spring head elbows, the young palm fronds starting to grow, and then the sort of high hairs on the wind, then blood drops in the air. That's the actual red fruit then on the tree, and then I won't go into too much detail, mostly because I'm not a what do you call it, English lit poetry interpreter, so I need to spend a lot more time doing that, because it is actually extremely rich and full of meaning that I haven't quite uncovered yet. But it's basically all the different parts of the oil palm are in here. And then the last one is a flame with kernels, which I forgot to mention. The most important thing is that kernels are used for making the fire for melting iron. So that's another reason why the oil palm is so important for that. And yeah, this is just another aspect of it, that basically Ogun is quite multifaceted and quite complex. So there's sort of 7 different versions of Ogun. For example, if you think about Ogun for farmers, then it's more associated with palm oil. And so they're different. It's quite complex, and I have to admit I'm only at the beginning of working all this out at the moment. But it's yeah, it's actually quite a departure for me, because as I said, I've never done any of this sort of, because I used to think, it's not me basically. So, but I've had a complete conversion. I think it's actually very, very good to try and go out of your comfort zone and actually look at these things. And so that's what I've been doing here. I think we might, one more. And then lastly, it's oil palm or palm oil, because of its massive importance, but also particularly because of its because of the big wealth in the 19th century through this palm oil boom. Then basically what happened was that some of these local brokers who used to be brokers for the slave trade then moved on, like and for the European traders as well. Most of them used to be slave traders, and then when that sort of more or less had to come to an end, then they moved into palm oil as the next commodity, and that as did the local brokers. And so, but in that context, then a lot of people got very rich, and then they became quite and powerful, and sometimes even people who were slaves. Well, there was one famous one called Pepper, who was a slave originally, and he became then a king of a big area and very powerful, and that was all through palm oil brokerage. But in all parts of West Africa, it was basically very much part of power and money. And so for that reason, it's that sort of symbolism is everywhere. Here's just one example. This is the current Oba of Benin in a very recent photo shoot, which they did just maybe 2 or 3, maybe 4 years ago now. And you can see in the outfit, he's got an oil palm here, because it really is like it's still in so many ways, like really important for power basically as well. And this is just a brief, again, you can't, I should have taken a better picture, but it's also too much, but it's a brief, just a brief extract from David Patton's book, The Man-Leopard Mergers, which is about the Anang area, or Anang people in eastern Nigeria, which has a really good long description of how rituals and symbolic meaning of oil palm as a real source of power. And even in Sierra Leone nowadays, Marianne Ferme describes how the flag, or in the national, even in political parties today, the oil palm features as a really important thing. Sorry, wrong screen, sorry. Sorry. Okay, I'm actually now, and this is again last slide with clever last minute apparitions already being there. But so I obviously, as you can tell, I focused on this because this is just one chapter from the book, but I think you were particularly, I can't remember, it was something that emerged as something that I would give at this seminar here. But it's also for me interesting, and I would really love some feedback on discussion, because I still haven't quite, as you can tell, I thought this presentation would be me reading out a polished chapter. It is far the opposite. I have just managed to put together the slides, and I haven't really written it yet, but I am still struggling with, because in the book it is meant to be, and I can maybe change it, but it's meant to be before the whole oil palm boom and a sort of culture before colonial inputs. And actually it doesn't really work that way, because as we know, culture is completely is always so mixed and fluid, and everything we have now is already all these other things. So I have to find a different way to, maybe I change the order, or I don't know, but if any feedback on that would be very welcome. And yes, then of course also maybe again that would be interesting to hear from you, because I know, yeah, and this is the last one, is I know 99.9% of people, I mean, this is quite strange for me, because even if when I meet someone and they say, I would say I work on palm oil, then 90% of people respond by saying, telling me something about palm oil, always. It's like a sort of natural human reaction, and always that they have just boycotted Nutella, and so that they are, so that is, so, but I'm sure maybe all of you might be interested in that. I know that's always the big question that people have about boycotting or not boycotting, or what should be done about palm oil now. So I was just adding this here at the end. I am very happy to talk about that as well, but I just wanted to maybe also get some feedback from you, possibly what this, now talking about West African, the sort of bigger, deeper history and culture of palm oil, what that kind of maybe adds for you, or what you think it really brings. I think I might stop there then, if that's okay. Thank you.
So much, Pauline. Under pressure, that was really excellent. You tied it up in really quickly as well.
Yeah, sorry.
Through that.
Yeah, I did.
Such a lot.
Yeah,
going on. Does anybody want some questions straight away? Chris?
Yes, two quick questions. Yeah. First of all, under what state did the Mende live, or what do they now live? That's the first question.
In Sierra Leone, I think, although some are also in Liberia, I think.
Liberia and
Sierra Leone.
Sorry?
Sierra Leone.
Sierra Leone, yeah. And Liberia.
Yes.
Yep, fine, okay. And the second question was, I was
yeah,
trying to remember the first name of Mr. Equiano.
Yes. I can just go back. It's all. Yeah, yes.
Can you spell it?
Yes. Yes.
Somebody can write it on the back somewhere.
It's EQUIANO.
Yes, the first name.
Yes, so Olaudah is OLAUDAH, or Olaudah? I don't know. Yeah, Olaudah. Yes, something like that. Yes. Yeah.
I'll find it.
Yeah. It might just be Sierra Leone, by the way. I don't want to. Yeah, I think it's just Sierra Leone. Yeah.
Just making a connection with last week's talk by Camilla.
Oh,
because
yes.
She was talking about the Igbo women's war,
oh, yes.
which was triggered really by the 1929 crash, financial crash, which led to, of course, a huge plummeting of the demand for and price of palm oil, among other things, and one of the sparks for this extraordinary uprising by women. Incredible bravery, but just on another, just a purely personal point, just about me. It's just that it was about 2 years ago. My favorite chocolate was very delicious chocolate made of coconuts with huge amounts of palm oil. And this person here, Camilla, told me absolutely on pain of complete excommunication, I was never ever to eat such chocolate, and I miss it. But I have tried to be, try to behave.
Was it bad?
And I'm not eating that chocolate anymore.
It's called like the Swiss milk chocolate.
It's
Ritter square chocolate, and I must say it is absolutely. I mean, it just honestly irresistible chocolate, and that is resisting under instructions from this person.
Yeah, I'm myself a little bit, not to be, I am a tiny bit skeptical of, I mean, not skeptical, I think there's obviously consumer pressure does work. If a lot of people do it, obviously it does impact the market, but mostly I guess if you make a lot of noise about it. So I think just one person cutting out, it's better if you then also make a lot of noise about it the whole time, like telling everyone you've cut it out. That's probably more effective than just, because honestly, you're really, the majority of palm oil nowadays goes to other parts of the world. It does, but it does have I'm not neglecting, but there is a certain, I do have some issues with always this idea that everything is that we are only consumers and that everything we do is about consumer citizen, it's sort of consumer citizenship, that you you kind of show your power through what you consume. I find that's a tiny bit annoying in itself. However, I'm not in any way saying there are no problems with palm oil. It is just this virtuous, maybe you don't, I don't know.
I think if I was an orangutan, I would be very against anyone eating palm oil, probably. But anyway,
I nearly brought it today, but I have a sash banner across my wall, which comes from at least, 15 years ago, primates, not palm oil, from a climate rush actions where we used to wear these like suffragette sashes and stuff like this. So I mean, it's not just telling them you can't have chocolate. So
yeah. I mean, now, and I have to be quite careful because I'm not writing this because I'm a palm oil proponent in any way whatsoever. But I have come from it from a slightly different angle, like the West Africa angle. So there are a lot of, on Twitter, again, the millionth time, but there are some key people who are really against palm oil. And they really hate palm oil. Like it's quite extraordinary just how much they hate it, because then they keep on saying it's poisoous, it's cancerous, or inedible, like as if you could, like completely sort of as if the oil or the tree itself, like often write as if that is bad. And obviously there's nothing bad about it's just a tree that is now grown to such an extent that.
How much is still West African? Because you're saying this, that they're importing like noodles from Indonesia.
No, the noodles are made in they're big Indomie factories in Nigeria.
In Nigeria, okay. So,
because
there's a local palm oil industry still. And that's an indigenous industry, and that's it's I mean the plantations. Well, how much has that changed from the original types of agroforestry?
So in Nigeria, it's at the moment still 80% local, but they are slightly different. As in Indonesia, it's like you have some smallholders who are really small and up to 50 acres. Some are quite big actually, but they're still nothing compared to those plantations. So that is still, but you do have spreading now a little bit more. Some in Nigeria, but mostly in Liberia and other places, much bigger global big corporations, including, this is one of the reasons why I started off with all this, my original fieldwork area in Nigeria, Okumo, is a big oil palm plantation, basically. So but they are, so that is happening and it's spreading. At the same time, it is not to be, but there are a lot of issues, some of which might be slightly overhyped by the corporations, but some corporations are pulling out again because there's so many issues. They haven't even managed to start. They've sort of obtained titles for the land, but they're like very big areas in Liberia, for example, but they haven't actually been able, because there are actually loads of local communities there, and but I have to confess that is an area I haven't, and it's also changing quite a lot. I don't know enough about that at this moment, but it's contentious. But it's spreading in West Africa as well as in other parts, and of course Latin America.
Other questions?
On the Zoom questions.
Yeah, we can also ask from Zoom for questions. Just ask if there's anybody there who would like to.
Do I ask that?
Yeah. Just hi Zoom people, any questions? Any chat? I don't know if you've got chat. You haven't got much chat.
Oh God.
Any questions? Otherwise, back to the room. Can you hear us? We're not getting any answers.
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you. Hi,
I was just wondering what the difference is between Indonesia, which is the biggest producer now of palm oil, and what the you know, is West Africa now losing out in this massive global trade? Sorry, I know this isn't really your kind of thing as well, but you horribly get drawn into this stuff, I guess.
Yeah, it's been since the 1930s it started that Indonesia and Malaysia were really taking over, and suddenly I don't quite know where it used to be Nigeria for the first 50, or Nigeria was the main one, but West Africa as a whole for the 19th century and the early 20th century. But then from the 1930s onwards, I think it's Malaysia first and then Indonesia, and since the 1970s, I think. But now Nigeria is still an importer. So because so much palm oil is consumed in Nigeria, they don't produce enough for just the domestic market. Hardly any palm oil is exported, apart from this red palm oil is exported to the diaspora, in which I bought this in a shop in Eastbourne. So,
Is that naturally red? That's the colour.
Yes, yeah, it is natural. No, it is red. Yeah. I should actually just say
until you decolour it, it's going to be red. It's going to be red unless you do something to stop it being red.
Yeah, this is also, it also smells of the plastic bottle, but it has a distinct smell. Yeah. If anyone wants to, I can have a look at it. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
But can it be used as a cosmetic that makes you red? Actually, I mean, is it paint? Not really. It's
no, actually, for for perfume and cosmetics, there was almost like a sort of refining process locally as well, because that is really quite smelly as well. You couldn't use that as perfume, and you wouldn't. So I think.
But I mean, actually, to body paint red, it doesn't produce a red paint, does it? It's not.
I don't think so. No. Yeah.
So yeah, palm wine probably has a symbolism of redness almost for sure, but I know some of the mythology around palm wine is a very rich mythology associated to kingship as well.
Yes.
That would probably have symbolism to do with blood and menstruation and things like that.
Yeah, it's sort of with all these when you pour it onto, like, it's sort of it's sort of like blood. So it's like the sacrifice. Yeah.
Yes, it looks like blood.
Yeah.
In pouring out.
Yeah, this sort of thing. Yeah.
So it will have that.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, this may be too sort of general or obvious maybe as a question, but so could you give a quick overview of why palm oil is such an issue for the world, and is that just mass production, or is there other elements to it, and where do you see if boycotting is not a solution? It's probably
I'm not.
Is there a direction to take it? Maybe?
Yeah, so I'm actually not. I didn't mean to say I'm anti-boycott. It is just not the own. It's just such a simple. It's just like it's like when I mean, look, I'm sort of doing like everything about palm, and then it's always like, should I eat Nutella or not? It's like one little. It's like so small. But yes, but I'm not totally anti-boycott. It's just, but it's so the big issue is mostly that it happens to grow in areas which are also full of tropical forests, and therefore, I mean, palm oil, sorry, just again, not to sound like a proponent, but it's actually a very good, it uses, it's more productive, it's up to 10 times, but let's say 4 to 6 times more productive than any other vegetable crop producing oil. So in terms of pure acreage, it is not that bad, and because it uses it's I mean, the oil palm is amazing. It really does. It is amazing how much it produces as a tree, and so, but it is always in tropical areas. It is possibly a little bit more complex, but it's not really, because a lot of oil palm is now grown in what used to be like in Indonesia or Sumatra in particular. In what it used to be, it was first rubber, like forests were cleared for rubber, and now it's oil palm. But that doesn't really make it any better, because the history is still there that it was cleared, and the clearing does go on a lot more. It has been slowing down a tiny bit, but not enough. There is still expansion. The issue is basically, and now the issue is the legal frameworks. That basically, first of all, as with all capitalism and what the whole degrowth thing, the impetus is for growth. It's for all of these. So even if all these big corporations, if they say they're doing sustainable, as long as they have to keep on growing, there's ultimately no way you can not grow physically in space. But although they are investing a lot in increasing productivity, but it always has to grow all the time. And so then the issue is the deforestation, then that is linked to mass, especially on peat in Sumatra and other parts of Indonesia or Malaysia, it's on peatland, and so the carbon emissions are really big. Although I read recently they're not as big, it's very complicated how to measure carbon emissions from land use change, actually. Those figures have been a bit revised, but they're still big. And then there's massive air pollution through fires, like all these, I don't know whether in 2005 and again 2000, there were massive big fires, and Singapore was completely like it had really big issues and lots of people dying from air pollution. And even last year, in 2019, the whole of Sumatra was completely red for days because of the massive pollution from wildfires. And then it's also the water pollution and yeah, but biodiversity.
Are those wildfires or farmers' fires?
Well, no, they're linked to palm oil. Maybe not all of them necessarily. There are some ambiguities and multiple, but a lot of them are linked to oil palm expansion. Yeah.
It's actually illegal in Indonesia, but
yes,
people still try to do controlled fires, which get our plants.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the big one that we all know about is is biodiversity loss. It's not just orangutans, but tigers, loads of. And so in North Sumatra now, it's the big one is the Loisa ecosystem, which is really the most amazing kind of. In fact, the Jungle Book must have been about, because it's the only area in the world where you have wolves, bears, tigers, and elephants. All these big animals are all in one place in the Loisa ecosystem. So that is really amazing, and that is now very protected. But there are basically lots of issues of ongoing expansion. So that's
That's too much.
Yes, but it's not just in Borneo. Actually, Sumatra is not even the main frontier nowadays. It's mostly Borneo or West Kalimantan and then, of course, also now Latin America and West Africa as well. But then the other issue is also that whilst it does help with getting more calories, if you're in India, where a lot of people, it has helped with nutrition, just getting more food, basically more calories to people, because it's very cheap. So it does help with famine a little bit. But there's also then, of course, as we all know, a sort of obesity crisis in so many parts, including in Indonesia nowadays, because and it's not that palm oil is so bad, but because it's so cheap and so ubiquitous, and everyone fries now. The whole world eats in a completely different way, like Kentucky Fried Chicken, like chicken nuggets, that kind of. In Indonesia as well, everywhere we eat a lot more fried food, and that is all done in palm. Fish and chips, everything. So chicken nuggets is all palm oil all the time. So that's another reason why it's bad. And then. Going back to I don't know if you've heard of fatbergs, the problem here in sewage systems with wet wipes, and that's all palm oil as well. So it's really, yeah, it's so it's too, we have too much of it basically. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, sure, yeah.
I'm from Sierra Leone.
Oh, are you? Oh.
Lovely to see
okay.
many different ways in which it's part of Sierra Leonean life, identity even. I mean, I sometimes, when I'm missing home a little bit, I YouTube a recipe, and it's not just that palm oil's all over it, involved in it, but there's some great evocative power to it, and it's a way of the diaspora keeping in touch with their own roots and the experiences they have, things that have been handed down to them. So it's so rich in terms of culture. But I do also feel that I should mention that this is not a political point, but a lot of Sierra Leoneans, particularly people who have the restaurants and things like that in London, do try and emphasize that it's palm oil that they use, the red palm oil, the kind of stuff. That one there is quite different.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know how, you're the expert, but they always emphasize it is quite different from this more industrialized palm oil. So I don't know if does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, that's what I try to show. It really is. And there's nothing particularly wrong with, I mean, it was like, and it's a lot of agroforestry as well. It's mixed and
it's impossible to divorce from everything in terms of the culture, not just the food, but the whole sense of the culture itself. It would be impossible to imagine.
Yes.
We give us a lecture, perhaps.
What's your cuisine?
We can all go out to a restaurant.
Yeah, I think that's the best job.
Thanks very much.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. I mean, just a quick, I don't know if some of you are into coconut. What time is it now? Am I completely? I can't see.
8:03.
8:03.
Yeah, we're only just past 8. So
Oh,
if there's
okay,
more
okay.
questions, we're fine.
Okay.
Just until people feel that.
Just because I was just going to say one more thing.
We need to stop at about 12:15.
Okay, but just if you think of oils and, like, for example, coconut oil nowadays is sometimes sort of as a really as a sort of nice healthy oil, but for the early 20th century, like Unilever, for example, all these people trying to go move into plantation. Unilever used to buy all this from West Africa, like from, and even when they started in Congo, the beginning, they took quite a few decades to really get plantations going. It was all bought from indigenous production, like this sort of local, even the large scale. So it's quite interesting.
So those Igbo women in Calabar Province, Libya and Calabar Province, that was agroforestry production, indigenous production.
Exactly, yes. But coconut, this one of the earliest is also called copal, and copal was, so at the beginning of the 20th century, palm oil and coconut were exactly the same, with moving into large-scale plantations. But for reasons I think the ecology is slightly different. But then we basically, coconut didn't really expand so much. I think it grows in different areas, and so it was sort of palm oil in the end that took over. But there's nothing intrinsically better or worse about. They're both palm trees and they both produce oil, and it's nothing. It's just the political economy of it that is different.
Are we looking after the Zoom people tomorrow?
Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry.
Check if there's some Zoom questions.
So you must all be completely exhausted after this.
The stress and
yes,
terror.
yes.
Any more Zoom questions for Pauline? You're too quiet. Quiet on the Zoom. Thoughtful.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
They had the patience to hang on.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you for hanging on. Yes. I was going to try and ask something about the Poro Sunday material, because I haven't read Fermi's book, a really interesting book. But I remember reading on, I think it was an article by somebody called Murphy about Pele, Liberia, Poro, and Sunday, and talking how, because there is a lot of hierarchy in the organization of both of those secret societies, and that the Poro the young initiate members were very exploited for production, and that this soap making, as you're saying, and sending boys running up and down the trees, that now I'm beginning to understand what it was that they were doing in that case. But yeah, I don't know if you want to say any more about that. Yeah.
No, it's true that Murphy article is very good about this, and he has this whole, which I meant to sort of read again for this, because but it's sort of about basically the whole secrecy is I guess the sort of thing for power of old people over young people, and so and it is such a I mean the whole Poro Sunday complex is so fascinating, and obviously, as you said, it's got relationship to the old terrors about the slave trade, and how do you make sure you can trust each other and that kind of thing. So that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Let's see.
Could you maybe share more about how the secret society is the method of, I suppose, hierarchy or protection of certain ideas from the old to the young? Did I understand that right?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I should have reread it, because I have read it many times. I used to teach it, so, and I just and now, like 5 years on, I can't. But it's basically about this whole, basically, I suppose, knowledge is that it's sort of more that well, first of all, it's more performative in the sense that. Sorry, I can't really. I need to read it again. I'm sorry. But it's about.
My memory is that because the Poro and Sunday are universal. It's like everybody joins in most ethnic groups. Everybody's brought into those societies as a generality, but that does not mean that everybody goes through all the stages of the initiation or the hierarchy. And Murphy was particularly focused on the ways that the younger or sort of less able to rise in the ranks members their labor was purely being exploited by those that were right. So he was looking at it in that sort of sense.
Yeah, but
anthropology.
Yeah, I think it's sort of basically the idea is that it's lots of that the secrets are sort of something valuable and that you need to know them, and sort of that sort of exactly. But
and who is it? Beryl.
Based,
Name now, but also on with Pele. The language of secrecy.
yes,
Yeah, the idea that the Poirot and communities might be, what it's teaching you basically is how to keep secrets, how to keep boundaries. And those secrets might be used for cabals of kind of oligarchy, or they could be used for trade unionists, or they could be used for, all kinds of different ways. So it can go in very many different political directions, from below, from above. But it's about keeping secrets. It's not so much that there is a secret, so much
yes, exactly.
how
Yes.
to
It's
keep
more about how to, rather than the secrets that
Yes.
they're keeping,
concealing and revealing of secrets.
and protecting that in a circle.
Well, I was wondering whether Chris, because my memory is pretty shaky as well, like Alma Gottlieb was writing about Sunday and sort of related to some of your stuff.
Well, this was the book Blood Magic, the anthropology of menstruation, which I had a chapter in, and she was discussing the red
Special soup.
the special red soup, which was kind of menstrual blood, which, although it was menstrual blood, it was actually, if you're in the right sort of secret place, you could drink it safely. So it was very explicitly linking the redness of the soup and the oil with menstruation, in a book about the potency, the symbolic potency of menstrual blood as fertility and all those other things. So Alma Gottlieb is one of the editors of that book.
Blood Magic.
It's a lovely book, by the way. I mean, it's got that.
Anthropology.
And also there's another, there was the other chapter, wasn't there? Not quite the same area, but it was about the synchrony, the antemnae.
The Temne, from Frederick Lamb.
From Frederick Lamb, that's the one.
But that wasn't so much about palm oil.
It wasn't quite, no, but it was linked to those secret societies.
Oh yes, the Temne have a bundle, which is Sunday.
So the one chapter was about menstruation, the other chapter was about the moon and the right period for performing these different ceremonies, which are all connected.
Yeah.
Thanks, yeah.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I don't partake of Nutella, but I do use soap.
Yes.
And you mentioned Unilever.
Yes.
Lever Brothers and Sunlight Soap.
Yes.
In the last century.
Yes.
And they had a community around the Liverpool area, Port Sunlight.
Yes.
And there was even a little song produced. Apologies to anybody who knows this song. When shepherds washed their socks by night, all seated on the ground, a bar of sunlight soap came down and glory shone around.
Wow, that's great. Yeah.
Appropriation.
Thank you. That was really great. I didn't know that song.
Goods by imperialists.
Yes.
I think that might be quite a good note to end on.
Yeah. Yes, possibly. Yes. Thank you.
In which case, let me just say something for Zoom people, if they can see.
Take your mask off,
So yes, sorry, I'm so giddy. So really thank you so much to Paulina for grace under pressure. we were so stressed with that, sorting that out. And thank you very much to the Zoom people for hanging on in there and listening. I hope it was very much worth it in the end. Just to say, for the Zoom community next week, well, for everybody, next week we are going to be Zoom only, which will make everything so much easier. And hopefully they can mend upstairs for us in that time. And the person who's speaking is a really good colleague of ours, Mona Finnegan. And she is talking, her talk is titled, "Is There Anybody Out There? Love and Loneliness in Anthropology?" And that will be a very profound talk reflecting on issues of COVID, the whole lockdown, but also on Mona's experience with Bayaka forest peoples. And that really won't be, it's a talk not to miss, I would say. But otherwise,
thank you, Zoom guys. And I think, Laurence, we can probably end our recording and say goodbye. And I'm going to tell the other people about the pub, the possibility of pub. But thank you very much for coming today. And thanks to Pauline for that.
Thank you.
Goodbye. Goodbye. I hope it worked out. Right, I'm going to end the meeting.
Those of us who want to go